Well, today I have the pleasure of having with me one of the best known researchers in the field of gifted education and talent development. He's also a good friend, what obviously is for me a better title. Stephen Pfeiffer is a professor of the College of Education at the Florida State University. He's a licensed psychologist and fellow of the American Psychological Association. And over the past 30 years, he has worked with gifted children and their families in his counseling practice. So he's a researcher, he's a practitioner, he's a professor at the university. He is the leading author of the gifted rating scales that I hope we will be able to adapt to our language in the next feature. That is a scale that probably is the most widely used in research and teaching for the identification of or screening of gifted kids. And he has authored more than 150 articles, books, chapters. But I want to emphasize two or three of them. Perhaps the first one is the Handbook of Giftedness that was published in 2008, if I'm right. That is a widely used text in gifted courses and teacher training, and also in graduate studies, I guess. And recently he completed another book that is being very popular, and I hope we will translate into Spanish soon, that is called Serving the Gifted. There is a very practical book and very well sounded, published by Routledge in 2012. And just months ago, another book that is entitled Essentials of Gifted Assessment, published by Wiley. All of these books might be found in Amazon or everywhere, no? But he's also, and this is the last point I want to mention before putting some questions to Stephen. He was co-editor with me and my right hand really in the monograph we made of Revista de Educación from the Ministry of Education of Spain. It's the number 368, with many of the architects of the field contributed in a monograph on gifted education and talent development that is available in English and Spanish online from the web page of the ministry. Well, thank you, Steve, for accepting my invitation to have this conversation.
My pleasure, Javier.
And I have a number of questions for you to answer along this, let's say, interview. I'm a researcher, I'm not a journalist, but I hope to be able to manage to convey some questions. Well, the first thing I am particularly interested in is about, there is a huge community of researchers around the world dedicated to gifted education and talent development. But as such, they evolve with the years, with the decades, even with the centuries, no? So we can consider that perhaps pioneers like Binet or Terman or Hollingworth are gone, or their theories have evolved and changed. Nevertheless, many teachers today, and many researchers as well, are anchored in the old IQ ideas. And they think that to have an IQ and to be a gifted person are the same thing. So this is my first question. Could you tell us what is the most prevalent and well-based approach to the concept of giftedness in the academia nowadays?
Sure, I'll be happy to. Let me start by thanking you for that very generous introduction. I was very touched by that. Thank you. The field has evolved over the last 120 years from early on viewing giftedness as the same as high IQ and high IQ is the same as giftedness. And that was of historical importance for us to understand as the field evolved to a much more sophisticated and nuanced appreciation for cognitive development and the neurosciences, helping us to understand that the developing brain over time changes as the individual interacts with his or her environment. So we've moved from giftedness equals high IQ, or high IQ is the same as giftedness, to now recognizing that each day the child evolves so that a developmental and contextual and synergistic model that looks at a young child's ability over time as it is influenced by a multitude of environmental factors predicts to ultimately, as children grow up, which young adults and adults are going to be eminent individuals in a wide array of different fields. So the old model was someone with a high IQ is going to end up being an eminent individual. The newer thinking over the last 20 or 25 years, based on research that we didn't have 100 years ago, but now we recognize that ability matters, but it only matters to a degree because environmental factors, educational factors, family factors, opportunities that the individual has, as well as their motivation, their interest, interacts over time to determine which individuals, when they're very young, of high ability or high IQ, ultimately end up setting the world on fire with great and creative findings or results. So we've moved from a simplistic model to a much more developmental, comprehensive, nuanced understanding of giftedness.
Yeah, so in this sense, you think that those who believe that some kids or some persons might be and some others might be not gifted is a wrong perception? Because this links with the second question I have for you. Because I read in some of your articles something that I think is important and related with your first answer. That is about gifted or giftedness as a social construction. Because when people anchors an IQ, they tend to use this label that seems easy to hang in the jacket of the people, and seem that it's something that you are blessed or not. But if you are, there is nothing to do, and if you are not, there is nothing to do as well. So what means exactly for you that giftedness is a social construction, and what are the practical implications of this?
Okay, that's a good question, and I'll try to succinctly answer what back at my university I spent 3 hours lecturing on. I guess the first point is to distinguish between IQ or intelligence or cognitive ability and giftedness. So in the early days, we equated high IQ with giftedness, giftedness with high IQ. I think modern thinkers and researchers now recognize that intellectual ability is multifaceted, it's complex, and it's a psychological construct that has a lot of support. Giftedness, on the other hand, is a social construct. It's just a way that we categorize a group of individuals who we think are in some way special from another group. It might be, for example, here in Madrid, high interest in football and the team Real Madrid. We would say clearly that those football players are all gifted, and we wouldn't disagree. But it's not like someone who played on the team but then was asked to leave was not gifted. The point is that it's sort of a artificial line we draw between who's a gifted football player and who's not. Well, the same applies to very bright, high-achieving, talented, high-aspiring students in the school. It's really a social construction when we say these particular students are gifted and the rest of the population isn't. We have deemed it artificially to make a cut between gifted and not gifted, but there's no science to where we make that cut. And that's my point in social construction. There's no magic between a particular I-score differentiating a student gifted versus not gifted.
So you mentioned a little bit on my third question. That is on IQ. No, it is related with these two previous ones. You said that having an IQ is not enough to be considered gifted. Could you explain a bit further what this means in practical terms? Because if to be gifted is not a state of being, if it is probably related with potential, with development, personal strengths, what main factors you consider are essential to really fulfill the potential you might have?
Well, you're asking another very excellent but complex question. Let me try to answer it briefly. I view, and many people agree with this, not all researchers in the gifted field, but many, that when we think of giftedness, we need to view it developmentally. So when we think of a very young child, before they've had an opportunity to have many years on this earth, before maybe they've even had formal schooling, when we can do a measure of their intellectual ability, it's one of the best estimates we have of the likelihood that over the next 10 to 12 years they will develop to do extraordinary and outstanding things. But as the child gets older and has more experiences in the real world, what we find is that in a variety of environmental factors play increasingly significant roles in interacting with their ability and evolving the likelihood that they're going to continue to do exceptional things. So taking a snapshot or picture of a child at age 3 or 4, general intellectual ability is very important and relevant. But taking a snapshot of a 14-year-old and trying to determine, are they going to do really great things in engineering or science or the arts or the humanities, we want to look at general ability, but we also then want to look at specific abilities that play a particular part in the domain that they're interested, and we want to look at a host of environmental and family factors that also contribute to the development of their ability. So it gets much, the lens we use becomes more broad as we look at the older child developing.
In the monograph I mentioned in the introduction that we published 1 year ago, more or less 1 year ago, a number of eminent colleagues contributed, like you, Renzulli, Subotny, Gagne, Paul Olszewski-Kubilius, Frank Worrell, and many others. All of them are offering different perspectives, different point of view, different conceptions. What brings the non-experts to say that, well, the experts do not agree, so we're free to believe whatever we think is better for us. But my question is, do you think that these different perspectives offer us enough common ground to have a solid approach to gifted education and talent development?
Great question. Because it would be easy to spend a lot of time talking about the differences. And you're right, there are differences among the leading researchers and writers and proponents of gifted education, but you're also right that there is a core of shared beliefs based on what the research has indicated over the last 25 years, that we all would argue, for example, one size fits all for gifted children makes no sense. That gifted children are a very varied population, and that we need to customize or individualize our educational work for the gifted child because they're very different. They come in all different sizes and shapes. The third thing I think that we'd all agree is that the single IQ test, although useful, falls far short of being the only measure that we should use in gifted education, either to identify a child or to label or categorize a child. The fourth thing I think we'd all agree is that developmental nature, that we want to look at the contextual factors, the environmental factors that go into developing gifts, and it varies based on the domain. 20, 30 years ago, it was one size fits all, just high IQ is gifted, everyone else isn't. Now we look at a rich variety of children who have potential to excel in a wide variety of different areas. The child who is going to excel in physics or the sciences is very different than the child who's going to excel in painting or the arts, or a child who's going to excel in politics or leadership area. And the unfolding of their gifts in these different areas is based on different factors that unfold at different times. So we've now, based on research, all agree that it's a different combination or algorithm of factors that leads to the unfolding of giftedness based on the type of gift.
What is the role here of things like, well, grit or motivation and commitment, let's say what you call the strengths, no? The effort, deliberate practice, because I think this will have a huge impact in what schools and families should do or not. Because if we agree with you that we're not talking about to be or not to be gifted, but just to know where is your profile of abilities and talents to fulfill your potential, that at the end is the goal of education. What is the role of the effort, of the work, of the number of hours you have to rehearse and train and spend learning things to really filling your capacity?
My own personal experience, not necessarily exclusively as a psychologist, but as a father of 3 children. One of my children, as I write in my 2013 book, was quite gifted in athletics, and she decided to play, in America we call it soccer, here you call it football. So I had the opportunity as a psychologist, but on the sidelines, watching her as a father develop, starting at age 5, where she had a lot of ability compared to other 5-year-olds. It would be analogous to high IQ. But as I watched her develop at age 6, 7, 8 to age 10, 12, she got identified for the Olympic team, the women's Olympic team. I saw the hundreds and hundreds of hours of effort that she had to put on the playing field, and how her personality and willingness to be coached, how she responded to feedback, how she responded to failure and disappointment, how she interacted with other players, all those non-athletic gifts played a key part in the evolution of her talent to age 17 or 18, where she became an All-American. So it helped me see from outside of the classroom and outside of being a psychologist, the development of the thousands of hours, the coaching, the mentoring, her frustration, her handling of disappointment were all keys in her ultimate success. I saw other girls her age as talented as she was, maybe some more talented, but because of certain personality factors or unwillingness to spend the extra hours practicing on the field, or the difficulty with failure and not being able to rebound, didn't develop to the highest level that they could have. And it helped me to recognize that those same phenomena obviously occurs in the gifted field in education, as well as on the soccer or football field, that a child's ability can only take them so far. The thousands of hours of practice, the coaching, the feedback, the resources that are provided to them, the support from the parents, all that ultimately determines whether a young gifted child ultimately ends up being a young adult gifted individual or not. And those environmental factors, psychosocial factors, family factors, personality factors are as important as our God-given gifts.
Thank you. Let's look for a minute to the schools. We are in a country with where perhaps 95-98% of the gifted kids, whatever we define it, them are not identified. We don't have systematic processes, what means that if they are not identified, probably they are not served, or their needs are not served properly. The question is, how do you think teachers could identify these kids? If you think it's really needed, or just we have to wait for them to blossom themselves in some way, no? And in other words, do you think that we need to establish active provision for them for identification and serving their peculiar and particular needs of every singular kid at the schools?
I think schools and a society identifying its highest potential children is one of the most important roles a society can have in protecting its future and ensuring the further development of a society. So I clearly advocate for early screening identification of our young children in Spain and in every country that has likely potential to go on to be our next generation of leaders, not only academic leaders, but leaders in politics, in government, in law, in psychology, in engineering, in the helping professions. It's one of the reasons why more than 10 years ago we developed the teacher rating scale that you had mentioned earlier, and thank you for mentioning that, because I felt very strongly that we needed an early screener that teachers could use that was scientifically defensible, that was reliable, that could accurately pinpoint young children, as young as we've used at age 3 and 4, who had the potential to go on to do amazing things. Now, again, from the developmental model, it's not enough just to identify them and assume that they're going to become successful on their own. Going back to my football analogy, it takes a lot of effort and work and concerted planning. But the earlier we can identify the very bright child in the classroom and provide them the type of challenging curriculum, the type of activities and experiences that's going to further their ability, the more we can hope that our society will better itself in the future.
One more question. Let's think about the day after day in the school. We have, perhaps in many other countries as well, what you used to call in America the age grade lockstep, what means that your age belongs to a particular grade with disregard. So age is the rule to group students instead of ability or competence, etc. And many teachers feel comfortable with this way of doing things, and they tend to use the same curriculum for all the students at the same time with the same level, what you also call the one-size-fits-all. Could you send them a message telling, or just make a short reflection, how gifted education and talent development matches or mismatches with one-size-fits-all?
Sure. one of the things that gifted education has done that's been, I think, extraordinarily valuable to general education or regular education, it's recognition over the last 25 years that individualized instruction, that children vary tremendously in their rate and pace of learning, how they learn, has been now adopted by general education, clearly in the United States and in other countries around the globe. So what we know is that children vary tremendously in a range of learning-related attributes, and that the best education respects these individual differences. It really reminds me, as a parent, I have 3 children. They're all grown adults now. 3 children, and they were very different. Same family, same parents, but my wife and I came to recognize that we needed to treat each of them in their own unique ways. Even though they were within one family, they had major differences, and we had to discipline them slightly differently. We had to approach providing them with encouragement differently. The same is true in a classroom of 20, 25, 30, 35 students. I think intuitively bright teachers recognize, even if they're given one curriculum and forced to educate all the students with that one curriculum, I think the intuitively bright teacher, and I met really hundreds of them, they recognize there's wide variability in the children that I'm teaching, in their interests, their motivation, how they learn, where they are in terms of different topical areas. And this individualization is just an obvious aspect of human existence.
Well, my last question probably is not an easy one, but I'm sure you will manage very well. You know, many parents in this country are fighting, to say fighting in a soft meaning, against the school that ignores very frequently their children's needs. There are many teachers that do not think they have to provide different things, as we mentioned just now. Administration and policymakers dictate laws that very infrequently come into force or mean something practical in the day-to-day in the schools. So could you send a short message to these 3 groups? One message for the parents, one message for the teachers, and one message for the administration?
I've run a number of workshops with parents and teachers that initially, when I meet with the parents alone, many of them will express frustration that the teachers don't understand their child and need to. And then when I meet with the teachers alone, they express the frustration of parents being too pushy or demanding and not understanding the pressures that they're having. But when I bring the groups together, what I found when I step back and say, what is the overall mission of education? What's the overall mission of raising children in today's society? What I find is unanimity in the values and beliefs that teachers and parents and administrators have. For the common good, they recognize we love children, that's why we've had them, that's why we're teaching them, that's why I'm an administrator of a school. We want them to develop and flourish and be good citizens. We want them to learn and be open thinkers. Parents, teachers, administrators agree. So I think reminding each group, the parent, the teacher, the administrator, why did you get into education? Why did you have children? What is the overall important vision and mission for education? And starting there and then saying, where is some common ground in terms of individualizing? From the parent's perspective, it makes an awful lot of sense. From the teacher's perspective, it does, but I have plenty of kids in the class. How do I do it? So they need the resources and they need instruction and guidance in how to do that. From the administrator's perspective, so many other challenges that they have in terms of safety, but they also appreciate the important overarching goal. So I think continually reminding each about the big mission of raising our young citizens to be successful adults is helpful.
Well, thank you very much. I don't think it's reasonable to abuse any more of your expertise and time. It was a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
And I wish to thank my university, Universidad Internacional de La Rioja, UNIR, for the support and facilities provided to make this possible. Let me thank you very much for this thought-provoking conversation that I'm sure will enlighten the minds of many educators. I hope this will be not the last time we meet here in Spain. And thank you to the audience for watching this interview. Thank you.
My pleasure.